I didn't scream. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I didn't send a passive-aggressive Slack message. I just pulled the last compliance audit indemnification form out of my desk drawer and walked it over to her workstation. That was it. 14 days later, 2 federal agents walked through our office door, stood in the middle of the floor, and asked one question out loud: who is the primary signatory on this account? The smile she had been wearing for 2 weeks disappeared so fast it was almost surgical. Let me back up, because you need to understand what she actually took from me, and more importantly, what she had no idea she was picking up. I had been managing a cross-border enterprise account for almost a full year. We're not talking about a small fish. The contract value was in the 7-figure range. The back-end commission structure ran into the hundreds of thousands. And the client itself, a foreign-affiliated entity with supply chain payment flows running through 3 jurisdictions and a third-party intermediary arrangement that made our legal team visibly nervous every time someone brought it up in a meeting. The internal compliance requirements for this account were not suggestions. Every single step had to be documented. Every approval had to live in the email chain. Every risk flag had to be acknowledged in writing. I had been doing exactly that for 11 months. I had not pushed for the final signature because our legal team was still waiting on supplemental audit documentation from the client's overseas affiliate. I was not stalling. I was doing the job correctly. Her name was Danielle. She was 34, had been at the company for 3 years, and had a very specific skill set that had nothing to do with client management. She was exceptional at being in the room when decisions were made. She had a talent for repeating other people's strategies in meetings with slightly different wording and receiving credit for the synthesis. She had a relationship with our regional manager, Marcus, that was close enough that she got forwarded internal memos before they hit the general distribution list. Her favorite line, and I heard her say this more than once in the kitchen, was, "Clients only remember the person who signs." I want you to hold that sentence. Because it is the most expensive thing she ever said out loud. The week before the scheduled signing, I opened our CRM and saw that the account owner field had been updated. Her name was in it. Mine was gone. There was no handoff meeting. There was no conversation. Marcus sent a 4-line email to the team that said, in the most bloodless corporate language possible, that for efficiency purposes the account was being transitioned to Danielle, and that I should cooperate with the remaining documentation transfer. I read that email twice. Then I opened a new message and typed very carefully, "Please confirm that effective today, all business development activity, document review, contract execution responsibility, and compliance audit liability for this account are assumed by the new account owner." Marcus replied within 20 minutes. One word. Confirmed. I saved that email in 4 separate places. Danielle started performing immediately. She told people in the kitchen that I had been sitting on that account for a year without closing it, which was, in her words, a communication problem. She posted in the team channel about her new portfolio addition with the kind of energy that made 3 people send her congratulations. She had my client risk memo deleted from the shared drive and replaced with a clean pricing summary. Then she asked me to package every historical email thread, every contract draft, every client contact record, and send it to her in a single transfer. I did. Before I sent it, I made sure the package included everything, including the audit trail of every compliance warning I had ever flagged on that account. I also printed a fresh copy of the final audit indemnification form and slipped it into the transfer folder. When I handed her the folder, I said one thing: that last form is not a standard receipt. You should have legal review it before you sign. She looked at me the way people look at someone they have already mentally filed under irrelevant. She said, "You know why you never closed a big account? You think too much." Then she signed it. I went back to my desk. A colleague leaned over and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He asked if I was just going to let this happen. I said, "She wants to sign. Let her sign the whole thing." Marcus stopped by later and asked why I was being so cooperative. I told him the responsibility boundary was now clear, and that was all I needed. I spent the next 3 days doing 3 things only. I organized every piece of communication I had ever sent on that account into a chronological archive. I made backup copies of every compliance warning I had issued in writing. And I confirmed, through a separate internal channel, that my name did not appear anywhere on the final indemnification document. 6 weeks later, the client's overseas affiliate was flagged in a cross-border financial investigation. I will not go into the specifics of what the investigators found, because that is not my story to tell. What I can tell you is that our company's legal team suddenly became very interested in the signing history of that account. Marcus, sensing the ground shifting, told legal that the account had been primarily managed by me for the majority of the engagement period. He was not wrong about that. But he made one critical miscalculation. He forgot about the email. I forwarded it to legal without a single word of commentary. Just the original message I sent asking for written confirmation of the responsibility transfer. And Marcus's one-word reply underneath it. Then I submitted my full evidence package. Every compliance warning I had issued on that account. Time-stamped. The documentation showing I had never signed the final indemnification form. The access log showing that the client risk memo had been deleted after the account transfer. The signed form with Danielle's signature as primary legal responsible party. The written confirmation from Marcus that all account liability had been transferred. The office dynamic changed in about 48 hours. People who had been congratulating Danielle 2 weeks earlier were now sending me messages asking why I hadn't said something sooner. One person asked if I had known this was coming. Another asked if I could help explain the situation to legal on her behalf. I replied to every single one of those messages the same way. I flagged the risk in writing. I recommended legal review before signing. That recommendation is in the record. The morning the federal agents arrived, I was at my desk. They walked past me. They walked past Marcus. They stopped at Danielle's workstation and asked who had signed as primary audit responsible party on the account. She stood up. Her face had the specific color of someone who has just understood something they cannot undo. The sequence of consequences was not fast, but it was complete. She was placed on immediate administrative suspension. The commission she had collected was clawed back by the company. Marcus was placed under internal investigation for authorizing an unqualified account transfer on a high-risk compliance file. Danielle was named as a cooperative subject in a cross-border financial misconduct investigation. The kind of investigation that does not leave your professional record quietly. The kind that future employers find when they run background checks. The kind that requires explanation in every job interview for the rest of your career. I sat at my desk and watched it happen. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something closer to tired. She thought she had taken $1 million client from me. What she actually took was a compliance liability that I had spent a year carefully identifying, documenting, and choosing not to touch until the legal foundation was solid. She grabbed it because she saw the commission. She signed it because she thought signing was winning. She was right about one thing. Clients do remember the person who signs. Watching Danielle get walked into that conference room, I felt nothing I expected to feel. I thought letting someone grab a live compliance grenade and sign their own name to it was the coldest move I had in me. Then I started thinking about something I had heard through a contact a few months later. A full-stack engineer who had been cut from a tech company, a guy who had spent 10 years building their core infrastructure, had simply stopped maintaining a small personal plugin he had been running on his own dime. 1 month later, the company's cloud bill came in at $500,000. And I thought, okay, that is a different category of cold entirely. That story was mine. I was that engineer. I had been at the company for a decade. My name was Kyle. I was 41. And I built the automation layer that kept their entire operation from hemorrhaging money into AWS every single month. Let me tell you what I actually did there, because the official job title, Senior Full Stack Developer, does not come close to covering it. I built the customer data pipeline. I built the internal report generation system. I designed the API scheduling architecture. I handled bulk order synchronization across 3 platforms. And most importantly, I built a compression and caching plugin that reduced the number of raw server calls the company's workflows made by roughly 94%. Without that plugin, every automated process they ran hit the primary server directly, repeatedly, without batching, without caching, without any intelligent retry logic. With it, hundreds of thousands of redundant calls got collapsed into a few thousand clean ones. The cloud cost difference was not marginal. It was the difference between a manageable monthly bill and a number that would make a CFO physically leave the room. Here is the part that matters. That plugin was not built on company infrastructure. It was not in the company's code repository. It was not purchased through the company's procurement process. I had built it years earlier on my own developer account, using my own subscription, paying the hosting and API licensing costs out of my own pocket every single month. When I first integrated it into the company's workflow, the plan was always that they would formalize the arrangement, run it through procurement, get a proper licensing agreement in place. That never happened. Every time I raised it, the answer was some version of "it works fine, why create extra paperwork?" I sent formal emails about it. I sent them every year. One of them went directly to the CFO, a man named Richard, who replied with 11 words, "If it isn't broken and isn't costing us, don't fix it." I kept that email. I kept all of them. The day they called me into the layoff meeting, I was not surprised. The company had been making noise about cost optimization for 2 quarters. They had already brought in an offshore development team from a vendor they had found through a consultant, who, as far as I could tell, had never actually worked in software. The HR director, a woman named Patricia, read from a script. "This is not a personal decision. It reflects a strategic shift in how we resource technical operations. Your code base will be maintained by a more cost-effective team going forward." The severance package was insultingly thin. The exit agreement they wanted me to sign had a clause that was so broad it would have prevented me from working in my own specialty for 18 months. Before I signed anything, I asked one question. I asked Patricia to confirm in writing exactly which assets belonged to the company and which were considered personal property. She looked at me like I was being difficult. She said, "Company code belongs to the company. Your personal stuff is yours to handle." I asked her to put that in the exit documentation. She did. On my last day, I did everything correctly. I returned the company laptop. I transferred the full code repository with complete documentation. I handed over every internal credential within scope. I revoked my own access to company systems. And I sent one final email to the IT director, copying legal and HR. Per my exit agreement, I am terminating all personal account-held services that have been supporting company operations outside of formal procurement. Please transition to company-owned tooling or complete a formal licensing agreement for any third-party services currently running under my personal accounts. Nobody responded. The offshore team took over. Within 2 weeks, they noticed the system was running slower. Their solution was to write polling scripts. Aggressive ones. Scripts that hit the primary server every few seconds looking for updates. Scripts that, when they failed, retried immediately. Scripts that ran in parallel across multiple processes without any coordination layer. The caching layer was gone. The batching logic was gone. The intelligent request compression was gone. AWS elastic scaling kicked in. It kept kicking in. The bill for month 1 came back at just over $500,000. Richard called me. I did not answer. He left a voicemail. His voice had a quality I had never heard from him before. It was the voice of a man who had just looked at a number he could not explain to his board. I called back 2 days later. He told me there had been a disruption in system performance and asked if I was aware of any dependencies that had not been properly documented in the handoff. I told him that I had documented everything within the scope of company-owned assets, and that I had formally notified the company of the personal account services I was discontinuing, as required. He asked if I could help restore service continuity. I told him I would be happy to discuss a formal consulting engagement. He offered me a number that was less than my monthly salary had been. I declined. He called back the next day with a higher number. I told him I would need the company to first settle the outstanding costs I had personally absorbed over 3 years of running infrastructure on my own accounts, and that any future engagement would require a formal contract reviewed by my attorney. There was a long pause. He said he would need to loop in legal. I said that sounded exactly right. The internal audit that followed turned up a list of problems that went well beyond the cloud bill. The company had been running production workloads on personal developer accounts for years without formal agreements. Richard had been explicitly warned about this in writing and had chosen not to act. The layoff process had not included a critical dependency audit, which is a basic requirement for any responsible engineering transition. The offshore migration had been approved without a technical risk assessment. The resulting cloud costs, combined with client delivery delays that triggered penalty clauses in 3 separate contracts, created a financial event that got the board's attention fast. Richard was placed under board review. The offshore migration project was suspended. The company began emergency conversations with local engineering contractors. I came back. Not as an employee. As an external auditor, at a rate that reflected what my actual market value had always been. I was not there to fix the system. I was there to document what had gone wrong and provide a remediation roadmap. The $500,000 AWS bill sat on the first slide of every board presentation for the next 2 months. Richard had told me my position no longer offered a cost advantage. What he meant was that my salary was a line item he could see. What he never accounted for was the cost of everything I had been quietly absorbing on his behalf for 10 years. My salary was never the expensive part. The expensive part was everything I was doing for free. When I watched Richard on that video call, asking over and over whether there was any way to reverse the AWS charges, I felt something settle in me. He finally understood what a compliance boundary actually meant when it had a dollar sign attached to it. I thought a $500,000 cloud crater was about as ugly as things could get. Then I moved out to the suburbs, and I met my neighbor Dale. Dale was 52, loud, and the owner of a pickup truck that I can only describe as a statement. Not a vehicle. A statement. It had been lifted. The tires were extended past the factory width. It had an aftermarket front bumper that added about 8 inches of steel to the front end. The exhaust had been modified to produce a sound that I can only compare to a helicopter landing in a residential zone. And it was heavy. Visibly, structurally, undeniably heavy in a way that standard personal vehicles are not. When we first moved into the house, the truck was an inconvenience. It would park partially over the property line. It would block the sidewalk. It would idle in the driveway at 6 in the morning. I told myself it was just an adjustment period. New neighborhood, new dynamics. I would be patient. The situation escalated in stages. First it was half a block. Then it was directly in front of our driveway. Then it was at an angle that made it impossible for our car to exit without a 12-point turn. The garbage truck stopped coming down our side of the street because it could not get through. My daughter was late to school twice in 1 week. My wife started leaving 30 minutes early just to account for whatever Dale had decided to do with his truck the night before. I knocked on his door 3 times. The first time, he said the street was public and he had every right to park where he wanted. The second time, he told me our driveway was too narrow and that was my problem to solve. The third time, he walked out, put his hand on the hood of the truck, and said, "This is a road. What are you going to do about it?" I went home. I did not argue. I did not threaten. I started taking photographs. I documented every incident with timestamps. I recorded video of the truck's position relative to our driveway entrance. I noted the dates and times our vehicle was unable to exit. I noted the date the garbage truck bypassed our address. I went through the standard channels first, because I wanted to be thorough. I contacted our HOA. They told me the street was municipal property outside their jurisdiction. I called the non-emergency police line. An officer came out, spoke to Dale, and issued a verbal warning. Dale moved the truck 6 inches and parked it in the exact same spot the following morning. I called a towing company. The dispatcher told me the truck was too heavy for their standard equipment. I sat with that for a moment. Too heavy for a standard tow. I thought about that. And then I thought about something else. If a vehicle is too heavy for standard residential towing equipment, what category does that put it in? I spent an evening going through my state's Department of Transportation regulations. I found what I was looking for. The truck, based on its visible modifications, almost certainly exceeded the weight threshold that separates a personal light-duty vehicle from a commercial heavy-duty vehicle under state transportation code. That classification change does not just affect which parking rules apply. It affects where the vehicle can legally operate, what permits are required, what safety certifications are required, and which enforcement agencies have jurisdiction. Dale had not been parking a truck in front of my house. He had been parking an unregistered, unpermitted, non-certified commercial weight vehicle in a residential zone. That is a different problem entirely. And it belongs to a different set of people to solve. I contacted the State Department of Transportation. I contacted the Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Office. I contacted the Heavy Transport Safety Inspection Unit. I did not call them to complain about a neighbor. I submitted a formal report. A vehicle consistent with commercial heavy-duty classification has been repeatedly parked in a residential zone without apparent commercial vehicle permits. The vehicle has undergone visible aftermarket modifications and has repeatedly obstructed private driveway access. I attached the full photo and video documentation. I attached the HOA correspondence. I attached the police report from the verbal warning. I attached the towing company's written statement that the vehicle exceeded their standard equipment capacity. 2 days later, a state transportation enforcement vehicle parked in front of Dale's house. A commercial vehicle safety inspector and 2 officers knocked on his door. Dale came out in flip-flops. He saw the vehicles. He saw the inspector's clipboard. His expression went through about 4 phases in 2 seconds. He said, "You don't have the right to touch my personal vehicle." The inspector looked at the truck. He looked at the lift kit. He looked at the extended axle width. He looked at the aftermarket front assembly. He ran the plate. He said, "This is not registered as a light personal vehicle in our system." What they found during the inspection was worse than the parking violation. The braking system was not rated for the vehicle's actual weight after modification. The suspension alterations had not been certified. The insurance policy on record covered a standard personal vehicle, not the modified configuration the truck was currently in. The front end height created a direct safety risk to pedestrians and smaller vehicles in the event of a collision. The vehicle had been operating in a residential area in this condition for over a year. Dale started walking it back fast. He said he had not known any of this applied. He said he could move the truck right now. He said he was willing to work something out. The inspector told him the vehicle could not be legally moved under its own power in its current condition. It did not meet the safety requirements for road operation. 2 heavy-duty tow trucks arrived. Dale stood on the curb. He was not quiet about it. He told anyone within earshot that I had destroyed his property, that this was harassment, that he was going to sue me. I was standing in my driveway. I did not say anything back. The truck was transported to a certified inspection facility. The results came back several days later. The core safety modifications were non-compliant and could not be remediated to bring the vehicle into a legal operating state. The insurance company declined coverage for the vehicle as modified. The truck was ordered to a salvage facility for deconstruction. Dale received invoices for the tow, the inspection, the administrative penalties, and the deconstruction processing fees. He asked me, through a note left in our mailbox, how I could do something like this over a parking spot. I did not write back. But if I had, I would have told him the truth. I did not do anything to his truck. I reported a safety concern to the people whose job it is to evaluate safety concerns. He built the truck. He parked it where he parked it. He made every single choice that led to that outcome. I just made sure the right people knew it existed. These 3 people made completely different mistakes. One thought that grabbing signing authority was the same as winning. One thought that cutting the engineer who built the system was the same as cutting costs. One thought that using size and attitude to block someone's driveway was the same as having power. None of them understood the same thing. The most effective response to someone who breaks rules in front of you is not to break rules back. It is to know exactly which rules they broke, exactly who has jurisdiction over those rules, and exactly how to hand them the paperwork that makes their own choices the thing that ends them. I never attacked any of them. I just stopped protecting them from themselves.